Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do. This podcast is designed to inform educators, policymakers, and school communities about the research-based practices, policies, and procedures that make great urban schools, well, simply put, great. I'm your host, Dr. Deborah McLaren, Executive Coach for NCUST. Today, our guest is Dr. Karen Janney. Welcome, Dr. Janney.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm happy to be here.
So, Dr. Janney, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and your educational journey.
Okay, happy to do that. First of all, I've lived in Chula Vista for over 60 years.
6 years or 60 years?
60.
That's what I thought you said.
That's exactly what I said. I attended schools in both the Chula Vista Elementary School District and the Sweetwater Union High School District. I then attended Point Loma Nazarene College and then returned to Sweetwater, where I spent close to 40 years as a teacher, classroom teacher, assistant principal at both the middle and high school levels, principal at both middle and high school, assistant superintendent, and eventually superintendent. So I'm truly invested in South County educational efforts.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of positions that you've held. I would think that it would be really an advantage to some degree because you have seen things at different levels in different ways.
Yeah, and it also enabled me to develop relationships over those years, right?
Yes, the
families.
The most important thing is the relationship building.
Right. So in 2007, I enrolled in San Diego State's Educational Leadership Doctoral Program. Mm-hmm. And that's where I first got introduced to Dr. Johnson and the NCUST work. And as a result of being a doctoral student, I was able to participate in several of the early validation visits for the America's Best Urban Schools. So that was my introduction to NCUST.
And at that point in the doctorate program, where were you in your education role?
I was an assistant. No, I started out as a principal and moved into the assistant superintendent role.
Okay, so you were getting the doctorate during that time.
Right. So then in 2010, it was the first time I retired. And I joined NCUST and became an executive coach like we all are now. And I was really excited to be actually part of the research efforts, right? And so that work involved, it actually paralleled my dissertation study because my dissertation was on the district's role in systemic reform. And so when I joined NCUST as an executive coach and we were learning what these high-performing urban schools did, I was also being able to, my doctoral dissertation study came alive as well because I was also able to look at the district's role in systemic reform during this time.
So it was job embedded to some degree.
Totally.
I noticed when you said you started the doc program in 2007 and NCUST became the organization that it is in 2005. So you were early on in the foundational years of the organization.
Absolutely. And so that's why I said as a doctoral student, we were part of the teams that went in and did the validation visits. Mm-hmm. And so we had early experiences of that research. So from 2010 to 2015 is when I was an executive coach. I had the opportunity to coach principals, elementary principals in Seminole County in Florida for 3 years. I coached K-8 principals in Phoenix for 5 years. I coached high school principals and district leaders in Houston ISD for 5 years. And then as well as San Diego and Riverside County schools during that time.
I thought it was only cats that had 9 lives. Great Scott, that's quite a bit.
Yeah. So the other thing is that as we identified more schools across the country, what we found was that entire school districts embraced the work of what NCUST is doing to the point where several of their schools became America's Best Urban School winners. Districts like Aldine Independent School District outside of Houston, Chula Vista Elementary School District, Long Beach Unified School District, and more recently Brownsville. So all of that work kind of paralleled the school work as well as the district work in our studies with NCUST.
Have you been able to, I know this is kind of off the document that we have that we're using to guide us, but have you had opportunity to look at long-term results for these schools and look back and say, the schools that we went to in 2007, now this is how they're doing. What can you tell us about that?
Well, if you look at the award-winning schools that are posted on the NCUST website, you'll see repeat winners. And so, and part of the NCUST criteria is that you cannot, once you become a winner, you've got to wait at least 3 or 4 years before you can apply again. And we have several, repeat winners with the NCUST award winners. One of them being Horace Mann Elementary in the Glendale School District. I think they're on 3 or 4 times winners, which means you're talking 12 to 16 years of continual improvement.
So that in itself is like a longitudinal study.
Absolutely.
And it proves that the research that NCUST has done is something that can be sustained over time. Those practices and things
Absolutely.
Are sustained over time. So the next question that I have for you here is about a little bit more about the overall findings. Tell us about the Leadership America's Best Urban Schools, and what were the overall findings?
Yeah, I'm glad. That's a great question. I love that because, in addition to the 8 teaching practices book that NCUST published, we've also published this book on leadership. And the book, what it really talks about is how leadership at these schools and districts influenced educational, equitable outcomes, right? These remarkable results on excellence and equity. So specifically, I'm referring to how these leaders influence the systems, like the routines, the practices of their schools in ways that produce these remarkable results through just a few key school characteristics and what we now call in NCUST the 3 empowering characteristics. So they did that by looking at their positive transformational culture, the students' access to challenging academic curricula, and their efforts towards effective initial instruction. So where many students, high rates of students, achieve engagement and mastery. So what we learned from these high-performing schools is that these characteristics did not emerge from attending a workshop or from purchasing a program or from having a charismatic principal. Instead, what we learned was that these characteristics developed as a result of what we now call in NCUST this coherent educational improvement system. And if you'll give me a second, let me just share a little bit about that.
Absolutely, because I need to get my dictionary.
Okay, all right. So this coherent educational system, what we found that was present in these schools had 5 outcomes, and they were all interrelated. So the first one is that stakeholders in these schools felt valued and capable. The second thing is that the educators in these schools really develop a focus on specific skills and concepts they want their students to learn. The third thing they do is they develop clarity around how they will assess student mastery. The fourth thing is that they improve, or they're constantly looking for ways to improve the effectiveness of their initial or first instruction. And then finally, they constantly look for ways that they can improve their effectiveness of the intervention and enrichment. And so they're all interrelated, right? So for example, if the routines, the structures, the policies, the norms help stakeholders feel valued and capable, then that alone, there's a systemic impact on the other outcomes. So really, in essence, what NCUST has learned is that we cannot pursue equity without attending to excellence. At the same time, we cannot successfully achieve excellence without a powerful commitment to equity.
So you bring up a really important point, and the work of NCUST for leaders is founded first and foremost on the students feeling valued and capable, and all those other things are very important. But if you don't feel valued and you don't feel like someone believes you're capable of learning in the first place, then you can do all of these other things, but it's like having what I've called a lid on a jar. You can keep pouring in the liquid, but it's not going to go inside the jar if the lid's on top.
Right.
So one of the things I know, we were recently a part of a walkthrough at a school, and I was with you on that. And one of the things that came to my mind is when we're talking about feeling valued, it's important to understand that different people, different cultures, who you are, will determine what makes you feel valued. Because what is important to you or makes you feel valued might not be the same as what makes me feel valued. And I think of books such as The 5 Love Languages, things of that nature, that I learned for myself that what makes me feel loved or valued is being able to either give gifts or being able to serve, but not necessarily words of affirmation. Can you talk a little bit more of the work of NCUST in terms of the importance of what it means to be or feel valued and capable when we're talking about practices that leaders will actually they will do?
Right. Right. So in the book, they talk about the key role of leaders in these remarkable schools, right? But they also talk about the leadership challenges, right? So the leadership challenges, so the issue with leaders and why they're so critical is that, first of all, leaders have to be able to convince or influence the staff that they work with, their desire to be different or to change. That's the first thing. The other challenge they have, and that they do well in these schools, is that they influence the belief in their capacity to succeed or improve. They also influence the clarity about roles and responsibilities. Also, another challenge is about building the capacity of all stakeholders, not only teachers, but every stakeholder in that school community, that they can do this work, that they are capable of doing that work. And so those challenges are also addressed in the book in ways to do that. But like the 8 teaching practices, where the center of the circle of the 8 teaching practices is where students feel loved and capable, the adults, all stakeholders, also have to feel valued and capable and appreciated during this process, or it just doesn't work.
I really appreciate how you bring that to the understanding that it's not just the children that need to feel capable, but as leaders, we need to feel capable, we need to feel valued, and then we also need to inspire others. When you talk about influence, I think of inspiration. And for me, I was talking recently with one of the administrators that I was coaching, and she was talking about being a servant leader. And I said, for me, I don't think of it as a servant leader. I think of it as inspirational. I want to inspire you so that you can't wait to do whatever it is I'm asking you to do. And so I appreciate you elaborating on the importance of us valuing our teachers, valuing our students, valuing our parents, and then also our peers, making sure that as an organization, it's not the district, but we're all the district. So thank you for that. So the next question that I have for you here is, tell us a little bit about, I want to make sure that you can tell us about a positive change that you've made in your work as an educational leader. Now, you talked about positive transformational culture. What is a change you feel that you made in your role as a leader, and something that you feel good about, or you feel that you did for the greater good?
Okay, thank you for that question. So back to the Sweetwater District, when an opportunity presented itself in the district where I not only grew up as a student, but also spent close to 40 years as an educator, I applied and was selected as superintendent of Sweetwater. And you may know or may not know that Sweetwater is the largest secondary school district in the state of California.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's right, it is. And so I had an opportunity to apply not only what I learned from my own dissertation on the district's role in systemic reform, but everything that I learned for the 5 years I worked with NCUST. And so when I first became the superintendent, one of the first things I did was trying to reorient the culture of the district, right? So one of the ways that I did that was, and I had permission to do this, was to re-envision or reimagine or recreate some of the language and the systems and the operations of how the district worked. For example, yes, there was always an assistant superintendent of curriculum but we changed that. We redefined it as the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning. Yes, we always had an assistant superintendent or a department around student support, but we created a new department called Assistant Sup of Equity, Culture, and Support Services. And then we finally added something that we felt would make the whole system more complete. We added a department around leadership development and systems innovation. And so those were all deliberate, and they were all based on my work and my time and experience with NCUST and my dissertation. And so that's the first thing that happened. We kind of reformulated, reoriented the culture. And
so I want to add something to that because what you're bringing to my mind is the power of labels.
Absolutely.
And, many times, throughout my lifetime anyway, there have been labels that have changed, even for labels for me as a Black woman, and now it's African American or different labels. We have different labels for how we refer to students that receive special education services. We have different labels, but labels have power. And I want to point that out because a lot of what's going on in the social change movements that are occurring in our society these days is about changing some of these labels and understanding how much power they have to sort of cause us to think in certain ways because of what that label means. So thank you for pointing that out. So go ahead and continue on. What made you feel like you made a difference?
Okay. So that was just the start, right?
Oh, my goodness.
That was just the beginning, because what happened then was, and there was a plan for this, right? And this is the vision that we had. So having had that experience with NCUST and that my own dissertation study, I then posed the question to everyone in the district, and that question was, what does effective first instruction that leads to student engagement and mastery look like? And they kept asking me, well, what's the answer? I said, no, we're gonna, I don't have the answer. I have a sense, I have some experience, but we're gonna arrive at this answer together. And so what we did first was, for the first 2 years, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Perez came to the district and provided professional development to all the school leadership teams around the coherent educational improvement system and the 3 empowering school characteristics. So we spent 2 years just learning and delving in and trying to understand all of the research that NCUST had learned since 2005. And then in the 3rd year, what we did was we took that a step to the next level. We said, after knowing what we know about the systems and the characteristics, we are going to evolve and come to a common understanding and description, or definition, if you will, of what effective first instruction looks like. And so that's what we did. And we created a framework collaboratively with all of the schools involved in the process, a framework, what we called Sweetwater's Essential Elements of Effective First Instruction. And what we all came to understand and to believe was that this framework involved like 6 different areas. The first area was, what are teacher beliefs and behaviors like? That's the first thing teachers have to look at, their own behavior and beliefs. The second thing, it's not necessarily in order, but these are 6 different things teachers must consider. The second thing, what is their classroom culture and social emotional learning they're going to pay attention to? The third thing is around what are the student learner outcomes going to be? The fourth thing was around, what are the high leverage instructional strategies that we're going to use? The fifth thing is, what does assessment for learning look like? Not assessment of learning, but what does assessment for learning look like? And then finally, what is the teacher reflection about this whole process? So that's what we were able to do to arrive at together collaboratively. It wasn't the superintendent saying this is what it's going to be, or even the principal saying that. This was a collective process where we came to this understanding. And it wouldn't have happened if we didn't pay attention to the elements of that coherent educational improvement system, where stakeholders feel valued. Those 5 areas were included in this framework, if you will.
So who were some of the voices that were involved? Like, which stakeholders were involved in this strategic thinking?
Great question. So at every school leadership team included the principal, teachers, counselors, classified staff, students, and parents. So every time they came together, all of those voices were there.
Yeah.
And at the end of every year, what we would do is we would celebrate our progress and our learning through what we called the district state of the district event, where 350 to 500 people would come, and we would celebrate our work, but it was different in that it wasn't a bunch of adults up there giving the keynotes. The students were the keynote speakers, and the students were the facilitators at each of the table groups. So we trained them how to be facilitators. The purpose of those meetings was to get the student voice out there, because people think differently when students are present.
Well,
right?
And also you're helping the students develop their skill
Absolutely.
set to use for a purpose.
Right.
So this is now meaningful to them. It's not just something they're doing in class to check off an assignment, but
Right.
they're doing there's relevance.
Right. And so they were the table facilitators leading each of the table groups, school leadership teams, but that included everybody, through the questions of what are our next steps as a district? How can we move forward? And so that only happens when you take into consideration all of the research that NCUST learned from these schools and districts. And so that was such a powerful experience. One step further, what it also did was it helped us create what we called the commitment by teachers. Mm-hmm. And the commitment is very specific, but basically it said this: each teacher will engage in their role as an active and positive member of a dynamic PLC in service of designing and implementing effective first instruction that leads the student engagement and mastery through the lens of equity. That sounds long, but that's everything NCUST has learned, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? Including the power of professional learning communities. And so that was the outcome of all of this work after 3.5 years.
So how did you find that you were able to get folks to commit to this purpose, commit to this sort of vision, and also to just that focus that you just stated? How did you build that commitment?
Right. So we brought in all of the stakeholders at the very beginning. So when I first came back to the district, called in the union presidents and said, listen, I would like to bring back school leadership teams, but I only want to do that with your support and your commitment, right? Because everyone's voice at the table is important, not only certificated staff, but classified staff, not only students, but families. And so once they understood the power in the collective capacity of everyone, then people agreed. And then I let them help design what that looked like.
Okay, so I want to point out a couple things that you're saying here that are really powerful. You are going back to what we talked about at the very beginning. You are demonstrating that you believe that everyone's voice, but definitely the voices of buy-in from your union leaders, that they're capable, that the teachers are capable of making these decisions and being a part of building the ship, as it were, as you go along. You also not only did you demonstrate what it was like to have them feel like they were capable, but also that they were valued. Because our teachers, there are a lot of things they know. There are a lot of things they bring to the table. And many times I think we overlook that and think, as leaders, oh, well, we're going to come in and tell you what to do. Well, I know personally that's not effective. That's not how you build commitment. It builds compliance perhaps, but not commitment. So thank you, because that brings us back to that foundational piece that NCUST has found in their research, and hopefully our listeners will really embrace. You must make sure that people feel valued, that you want to hear their voice, that you listen to their ideas, and that everyone has this sort of collective purpose and commitment to the cause. Thank you. So is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we conclude?
Well, again, thanks for that question, because I think if we go back to the leadership book, right, we're leading schools to become places where each demographic group of students exceed state expectations for all students. You know, they benefit from that positive transformational culture, that access to challenging curriculum, and that the effective engagement through first initial instruction. That's not easy work.
No.
It's challenging. But what we've learned from NCUST and what they talk throughout the book about is that, and also from the 175 schools that we've studied, because the book is all about their stories, right? What we've learned is that it's possible, and that excellent and equitable learning results only happens, just like what you said, because of an effort of many, of teachers,
Yes.
of counselors, of nurses, of secretaries, custodians, students, families, administrators, teachers, everybody. That critical mass, it only happens when that's present. It happens no other way. In every school that we have studied and awarded, that has been present. Finally, it's also important to know that school and district leaders are critical in that whole purpose, that whole process, because the leaders, again, have to address those challenges that they've got to come against. They've got to, help people, stakeholders feel valued. They have to, believe in their collective capacity. They've got to, put all those things in place. And that the implication for schools and districts, especially in the districts where they've had many winners, is that the schools and the principals have benefited from districts who support their efforts, right? If the districts aren't involved in supporting schools' efforts with these strategies and these empowering characteristics in the coherent educational system, it's less likely to happen. That is the message of the leadership book, that it's not only a group of people, but the district's role is just as important in attaining those equitable and excellent learning results.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I know that was something that came out in some training that I received from the Cultural Proficiency Learning Institute, and the work of Dolores and Randall Lindsay. And they also found that it was necessary for that support to be there from the school board to the superintendent to all of the district leaders, and everyone's working together, the parents, the students, collectively. And when you have that collective efficacy, John Hattie found that you get a lot of impact on student teaching and learning. And so thank you, because that reinforces the research, because you've lived it. And I want to thank you for being our guest today. Well, NCUST, the National Center for Urban Schools Transformation, was founded in 2005 to help districts and their partners transform schools into places where all students achieve academic proficiency, evidence of a love of learning, and graduate well prepared to succeed in post-secondary education, the workplace, and their communities. We will broadcast a new episode of this podcast at the beginning of every month. You can subscribe to the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbay Audio, and Raphonic. We want to thank you for listening to this episode of the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do. Until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Deborah McLaren, for the NCUST Review, What Great Schools Do.